Whenever we talk about historical architecture, it is very essential for us to know about the architectural techniques. Without knowing the architectural techniques, we cannot understand the architecture. I think the study of architectural techniques are almost mandatory to study the historical architecture. Today we are living in an era which is dominated by the RCC, reinforced cement concrete. This is an invention of the late 20th century, and this invention changed the whole architecture. And this through this technique that is known as RCC, we can use the cantilever. We transfer the weight of one part of the structure to the other part of the structure. And this technique that is known as RCC is it needs cement, concrete, and iron. Meaning by this invention of the RCC revolutionized the building concept. Now through this technique we never need now we no more need a load walls. And now the question arises, what was the architectural technique, what were the architectural techniques which prevailed before the RCC? Because whatever architectural heritage today we have, I think in the form of a legacy, architectural heritage constituted a majority portion, a very bigger portion. On the name of heritage, on the name of legacy of the bygone eras, we have a architectural heritage that constituted more than 60% of the total legacy. Now, if we want to understand the buildings and heritage buildings and the development of these buildings, so we must investigate what are the architectural techniques which used and prevail before the invention of RCC. Secondly, so far as the building material and mortar is concerned, cement is a 20th century, mid 20th century invention, late 20th century invention. Before cement, we don't have such a binding mortar of a binding force. But buildings are built 1000 years back, still survives. 500 years back, still survive. So now it is very essential for us to know what type of the building material and mortars were prevailing. Secondly, these architectural techniques and building material prevailing before the RCC must be investigated, because at that time mechanical invention was not happened so. Today you are having a air conditioned. You created a room through the RCC on a pillar constructions. You can chill this room with the air condition. But I am talking about the time when there was no air condition. So then the construction architecture should be designed in such a way that they must have provide the coolness to the structure during the hot season. Now with the mechanical invention, now architecture is not bound to follow the rules to keep the structure cool or hot. Now it is left to the mechanical devices, electrical devices. But I am talking to the times before the invention. All these inventions took place in the mid 20th century, late 20th century. Before that, we built the structure. This structure provides us warmness in the cool season and providing cool in the hot season. So we must, before studying the buildings, we must study the various architectural techniques that prevails before the invention of RCC. The most important technique which started from the, you can say, emergence of town or emergence of habitation, or when the men started to live in a structure, live in a house type of the structure, this tribute technique prevails from that time. What is tribute technique? Composed of a post and lintel. It is very easy. You created two pillar and keep a single piece of stone or wood, and now this space has been covered. Historically, architecture signifies how to cover the space, and this covering of space must have some aesthetic sense and provide full functionality. So now this structure having a post, you created two walls, and the span between these two walls has been covered with a piece of stone. These two walls, when the roof, in place of roof, we put a slabs of stones, and this structure and this was structure built in a no time, and this technique having its own merits and demerits. The merit of this structure is that it is not used shuttering, not used the support, temporary support to create the roof. The result is that it is not costly. It involves not a big cost. You simply created a walls of the room, and the roof, at the place of roof you put a single place of single slabs of stone one by one, and you prepared the room. You constructed, you was able to construct the room. You built a door, and the span of the door you put a stone, and then you continue to construct the whole wall. Now, what is the merit? It involved not a big cost, because you no need to create a temporary shuttering, and temporary shuttering involves some cost. Secondly, if you build the structure through this technique, it is where the structure can be put into use without waiting for a long time. There is no shuttering, no period of waiting to get the structure prepared. You can immediately use the structure. Now the question arises, what are the defects of these techniques, shortcomings of these techniques? These techniques, Traviate techniques, is known as pillar and lintel formation, and if we will want to discuss defects, we there is a restriction of the length of procuring a stone piece or wooden piece. Meaning by, you cannot get a single piece of stone with a length of 12 feet, 15 feet, not more than that. If you will able to get a 20 feet in length a stone piece, so how you carry at the place of the construction? The result is that this is a some sort of the restriction. Now you cannot get the piece of wood more than 12 feet and 15 feet. It resulted into the covering of space that is comparatively smaller. With this technique, you cannot create a big hall. If you want to create a big hall, then you have to put a pillar inside. So the pieces of the length of a single piece of the stone can be put and get the support of the pillars in, you can say, in the in span in support place in between. Now through this technique you cannot cover a big space because of the limitation of the length of the piece of stone and piece of wood. And through this technique such type of the structures, through this style, such type of the structures were built. Now you see, there is a room, in front of room there is a cloisters, and these are the pillars and lintels have been used to cover the span between these pillars. It is these piece of stones have been put together forming the roof. In the same way, this is a room backside, and its roof has been created with the by putting a slab of stones one after another, and in this way. Because of the limitation of the length of the stone or wood which we can procure from the mining, and now we cannot cover the space. Covering of the space is smaller or not a very big. Otherwise, in between we have to put a pillar. If we take an example of a great hall court of the Chandragupta Maurya, in excavation we found a very spacious hall has been discovered, but this hall is having a 80 pillars inside. Then this hall was created. Without these pillars, such a long roof cannot be possible. Another prevailing technique of the construction architecture is a Corvalled style. Corvalled style, when there is a open place and we uses the piece of stone and projecting towards inner side, piece of stone projecting towards inner side, and slowly, and by projecting the piece of stone, putting one on the another, and they were all projected towards inner side, and at the top level we put a single piece of stone. Now the space is covered. This is known as Corvalled style. This Corvalled style covers the space bigger than the space covered by Traviate style. In other words, the space covered by Traviate style is smaller than the space covered by the Corvalled style. Through this corvalling, we can cover the space little bigger than the space can be covered by Traviate style. This technique is having its own plus point and minus point. Of course, through this technique, we can cover the bigger space in the comparison of the space constructed by Traviated style. But what are its defects? When we use the piece of stone or brick projecting inner sides, the thickness of the roof became very enhanced. Thickness of the room increased like anything. When the thickness of the roof increased, it exerted a pressure on the wall. To bear this burden, the walls also became thick, and the thickness of the walls enhanced very much. It made the structure ponderous, it used the building material too much, and what was happened now, a lot of space get wasted in the thickness of the wall. Lot of material get wasted in the thickness of the wall, and lot of material also get wasted in the thickness of the roof. Second important problem with this style is that it is not friendly to the gravitational force. In the course of time, this structure get collapsed because it is not able to transfer its burden to the walls. Not transferred. Since it is having a huge burden, this weight never be transferred to the walls, and in the course of time, gravitational force destroyed this way of core welding. A number of the chaityas in India built with this technique, but slowly and gradually, they all are decayed. That's why we get a few masonry chaityas today. And this structure, this style cannot be used individually, but this style is always used in the combination of the traviated style. Through traviated, India was having a great structure in the form of the temples. We have a very lofty temples. We have a very, you can say, imposing structures. All are built with traviated style. And this traviated style, though covers a small place, but Indian heritage, majority of Indian heritage was built with traviated style. Another, and through Corvelling, we built such type of the structure. The pieces of the stone projected towards the inside, and ultimately this span has been covered. Now, another important style is known as arcuate. Arcuate style means a use of arch. This style invented in Greek and Rome, and it is very scientific. And you know, there is a great development, there is a lot of development of mathematics took place in Rome, and they invented this arch. They invented this arch. And there is a principle, if there is a circle, if you put a pressure here, this pressure never exerted on this point. This pressure deflected on both sides. This principle is used in case of the arch. This span is now covered with a making a arch, and true arch is composed of a keystone, two arch keystone, and radiating stone. These radiating stone are also known as boissures. One thing is essential here, if we use these 6 boissures on one side, so on and another side we have to use the 6 boissures, and a keystone is used. Through this technique, one of the biggest merit of this technique is that we can cover the space, we can cover the bigger space, and much bigger than the space covered by arcuate, covered by traviate, covered by Corvette. And but this arch developed, this technique developed in Rome, then migrated to Central Asia. In Central Asia, this half circle arch, this Tudor arch became a pointed arch. This Tudor arch became a pointed arch. Why? Because half circle arch, to build such a half circle arch, we need a mathematical expertise. We don't, and everywhere is not having a mathematical expertise. Secondly, this style though is very important technique to build the buildings, but it is costly. Why? Because when we built this arch, before building this arch, we have to place a temporary support to it. And in the temporary support, we have to use the calculation to make a exact half circle arch. And then we put all these ingredient components of the arch, and after some time, this temporary shuttering is removed. Then this arch is able to bear its burden, and this arch is, if there is a pressure, if there is a weight on this arch, this weight is automatically deflected or transferred on the walls from where this arch is sprung. And but it is a very costly affair. It needs mathematical calculation in the context. We need a sub. If in preparing a shuttering, if any calculation get defected, and became incorrect, the whole arch can fall down in the course of time. That's why in creating an arch, mathematical precision or mathematical, you can say, expertise must have. Now, what was happening? These arches migrated from Rome. In Central Asia, there is no such expertise in mathematics existed as Romans have. Then these half circle arch transformed into a pointed arch. In case of the pointed arch, we don't need such a precise mathematical calculations. We prepare a shuttering, and a pointed arch has been created. Pointed arch, and having a keystones and equal boissures on all sides. And from Central Asia, this pointed arch migrated to India. And during the medieval period, this arch was used almost in all the imperial buildings. And in all the buildings, monuments which were known for their perfection, the arch, true arch, is used. And on the concept of arch, we created the dome. When we rotate the arch, then it takes the shape of, when these are the courses of the boissures came from all sides, and it take the shape of the dome, and at the center we put a single keystone. Boissures are coming from all sides, and in this way this arcuate style has been created, and it revolutionized the building concept. But so far as my assessment goes, it is a elite class which can afford to use this arcuate style. In all the buildings built by some imperial persons, by some kings, queens, we found the use of arcuate style. Now here I would like to give some submission. In all the imperial buildings built by Mughals, built by Sultan directly, they are imbibed with arcuate system. They were built with arcuate style. But when we go and to the monuments which were built by nobility, built by other people, here we found on the name of architecture style, they used the indigenous technique, but in appearance, they followed the principles of the architecture style. They followed the principles of architecture styles. In appearance, building is arcuated, but all these arches were created through either through corbelling or through by using the piece of stone cut in the shape of the arcs and to form the arch. Another important component of this lecture is building material and mortar. What was the building material during the medieval period? The bricks. We have found two type of the bricks. One is sun-dried or baked bricks. Baked bricks means they were put in a fire and baked in a low temperature. Second type of the bricks, a kiln-turned bricks, properly created in kiln. And bricks have been used, and during the medieval period, on the size of the bricks, we can identify even the structure which has no inscription and no reference in the contemporary sources. Even in case of the Mughals, the size of brick also indicated the period of the Badshahs. So, like Lahori brick was put into use on a large scale by Shahjahan. Before that, brick is a little bit thick and having a good dimensions. Second, the stone. Stone, especially that is not so tough like granite stone. Red and rough sandstone was used as a building material on a large scale because this stone is not as hard as granite, and carving in these stones are very easy, very easy. So we uses this granite, this red sandstone for the building purpose. But in some buildings we also find a basalt that is little bit tougher than the red sandstone. Another important building material is wood. Wood was used as per one theory. The foundation of the Taj Mahal was put on wood. I don't know whether it's correct or not, but wood was used, and in some structure, especially in the region where the woods are very much available, wood was used even Mughals, especially in the Red Fort, a subterranean step wells. They use the huge planks of the wood. Another important building material is iron. Sometimes they use the iron clamp to club two stone at a one place. And so far as the mortar is concerned, the mortar is lime mortar. Lime mortar is always created by mixing the lime with surgi. Now the quality of lime is very important, as quality of lime depends on converting a stone into a lime. In some structures, we have also seen mud mixed with husk has been seen. Now the use of material and mortar is monitored by the status of a person, status of a builder. If he is a Shahjahan who was able to build a Taj Mahal, such a precious building, and another if a noble who was successfully built a single chhatri, single room haveli at Agra, and otherwise we don't have equal parameters, what material and what mortar could be used by these people. But these are the mortar and building material available and used during the medieval period, especially from 1526 to 1757. Thank you very much. I conclude.